I believe the numbers will be very limited indeed. And even if it did work, where's the advantage to us? This is Brexit Britain. We voted to take back control of our borders, not to accept a deal given to us by a French president.
Seriously? Not that old chestnut again. That was Nigel Farage reacting to the UK and France one-in, one-out migrant deal. I'm old enough to remember this.
Yes, I can make sure that numbers will come down, because we'll be able to control the system in that way. I don't think people in this country are hostile to immigration at all, let alone being hostile to immigrants, but they want it democratically controlled. And that's what Brexit allows us to do. That's why we need to get this thing through, which we can, before Christmas, and then come out on January the 31st.
And guess what actually happened?
This is net migration, the difference, as you all know by now, between people arriving and leaving the UK. For years it bumped along the bottom here. I say the bottom, 200 to 300,000 was still quite controversial. But look how it soared since we completed Brexit, almost touching 1 million at its peak.
Home Secretary Yvette Cooper recently told members of the Home Affairs Select Committee that there is evidence the lack of a migrant return deal after Brexit is a factor for people making the dangerous Channel crossing, and that the government was trying to secure a new return deal with Europe to replace the one that was lost.
Home Secretary, 10 years ago we didn't have small boat crossings, but now they're one of the biggest challenges your department faces. What's changed in the interim is we don't have the Dublin system. There's no mechanism for the Home Office to send back people to European countries where they should be. So my question is, are you looking at ways to work with European countries to strengthen that?
So in terms of strengthening the international cooperation, we obviously always said that we would like to see a replacement for the Dublin scheme and to recognise the impact of that. And it is something that there is evidence of people who arrive in the UK raising that as being a factor for them.
Ms Cooper made the remarks after being questioned by Labour MP Chris Murray about the EU's Dublin scheme, which gives member states the right to return migrants to European countries where they have previously made an asylum claim. The UK had such an arrangement with the EU until December 31st, 2020, when the Brexit transition period came to an end. The Home Secretary's comments came after a leaked recording was obtained by Sky News in which Tory Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, who back in 2020 was the Immigration Minister, appears to suggest they believed when it came to asylum there were flaws in the deal we had at the point we left the European Union. This is what Chris Philp told a gathering of Tory members on Zoom at the end of April when asked, why isn't there a better deal we can strike with the European Union, with countries like France?
Now, because we're out of the European Union now, we are out of the Dublin III regulations, and so we can't any longer rely on sending people back to the place where they first claimed asylum. When we did check it out, just before we exited the EU transitional arrangements on December the 31st, 2020, we did run some checks and found that about half the people crossing the Channel had claimed asylum previously elsewhere in Europe, in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, somewhere like that, and therefore could have been returned. But now we're out of Dublin, we can't do that, and that's why we need to have somewhere like Rwanda that we can send these people to as a deterrent.
Former Conservative Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has also suggested Britain can no longer return Channel migrants to France because of Brexit.
I'm someone who says we have a problem with illegal migration. You cannot have a situation where boat after boat crosses the Channel, leaving a perfectly safe country, France, and coming to another perfectly safe country, Britain. You just can't have that. And so you have to be creative and inventive, and that's what the Rwanda policy is.
And hand on heart, if this had come up when you were PM, would you have gone for this policy?
Well, we'd had a totally different situation because we had a situation where you could return people directly to France. Now, I'd love that situation to be the case again. That's the most sensible thing. People land on a beach in Kent, you take them straight back to France, you therefore break the model of the people's smugglers.
So shouldn't you be trying to get that?
Well, that's not available at the moment. It's simply not possible
at the
moment.
Brexit?
Well, because of the situation we're in, because of the attitude of others and all the rest of it. It's not available at the moment.
Lord Cameron's comments chime with this from French President Emmanuel Macron today.
Need to understand that since Brexit, and I'm saying all this quite honestly, I know it's not your case, Prime Minister, but many people in your country explained that Brexit would make it possible to fight more effectively against illegal immigration. But it's in fact since Brexit that UK has no migratory agreement with the EU. In fact, therefore, for candidates for the crossing, those alternative legal admission route, nor a readmission scheme after a crossing, it creates an incentive to make the crossing the precise opposite what the Brexiters promised.
And if all that's not enough for you, a study by Durham University has found the primary factor in the skyrocketing number of small boat crossings was the former Conservative government's decision to leave the European Union without a returns agreement in place. Here are some of the report's key findings. The primary factor behind small boat crossings is the UK's lacking a returns agreement with the EU. The government never assessed the impact of the consequences for leaving the EU without a returns agreement to replace the Dublin regulation and was caught by surprise. The UK did not need to leave this agreement in leaving the EU. Non-EU members have returns agreements with the EU. The lack of a returns agreement fueled an increase in crossings. A key factor is the withdrawal from a returns policy with the EU in 2020. Since 2016, the government has been warned repeatedly about the consequences of leaving the EU without a returns policy in place, including that it would fuel a large increase in irregular migration. It was asked several times to offer an assessment of the consequences, but it declined. The failure to acknowledge its past policy failure has impacted on its ability to fix it. After repeatedly denying the need to make any assessment of its oven-ready deal, the government appears unable to acknowledge that its failure to agree a returns agreement in this deal would have the consequences it has. This is because to address this failing is to recognise its earlier error, which may have political costs. So please remember all this next time you hear the Reform UK leader say something like this.
We voted to take back control of our borders,